Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Yeah, that's better. I like that. Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me here. What I have here, just to get started, is a deck of cards. There's a lot of cards here. Can I pass these around? Everybody could take one, just one card, okay? Everybody agrees? Not two, one card, okay? All right. Thank you. So I'm going to give you a little background about myself, how I got started, a little bit about my businesses. I'm going to share with everybody everything from my childhood through where our businesses are at today, how we got started, my passion for what I do every single day, and what I think it takes to be successful in running two organizations that are dedicated to working with the food industry. So, my name is Hirsch. When I do a lot of public speaking, I like an interactive course when I do public speaking. So if anybody has any questions, just please don't hesitate to ask, and I promote questions. And I'm going to ask some questions too. So I already know James, and I'll pick on you a lot, James, but I'll also pick on a few other people too, not just James. So I'm going to bring you back to how I got started for what I have today in business. I grew up on Long Island. By the way, does anybody know Dr. Hirsch?
Yes.
Dr. Hirsch is my sister. She's my sister. Yeah, there we go. She's my sister. So Dr. Hirsch and I grew up on Long Island in Huntington. We didn't have any. We were just the only two siblings. There was none other. My mother was a stay-at-home mom. Is that what they call it, a stay-at-home mom? Or yeah. And then my father was an engineer by trade, but he also dabbled in some entrepreneurship. When we were children, he started a carpet cleaning business called Spotless Carpet Cleaning. And with that, he was able to earn some extra money to help pay the bills. And he never made anything big out of that business, but he would travel around in New York City and Manhattan apartments, Brooklyn, and he would clean people's carpets. And I would go to work with him when I was young. So he had this big machine, and it would need to be filled up with water. So, good morning. So I would have to carry the water, hot water, from the sink to wherever the machine was, which in the city was difficult because we would do apartments in the city, and they were two-floor apartments, and I'd have to go up and down the stairs with the hot water, and I would burn myself, and I was a kid, and I didn't want to work, but I wanted the money, so I just did it. So a few years later, my father was done with the carpet cleaning, and he started a pest management business with one of our neighbors. The neighbor's name is Richard Kammerling. That's the RK, by the way, in our company name, RK Environmental Services. And I've got some goodies here for everybody that we could pass out a little bit later. The pest management company worked exclusively with the food industry. You see, his partner, Richard Kammerling, had his own business. It was called RK Chemical Systems. And what he did is he sold pesticides and did some consulting work with some large food processors. So he was the brains of the business, so to speak, and my father did most of the labor, and they brought in a few food processing facilities as clients, and they grew the business so that it was big enough to hire one employee. So they hired one employee who worked for them for a few years, and the lesson that I learned at an early age from listening to my father and his partner Richard was that the hardest part of running a business is working with employees. And if there's some lessons that I can share with you today, and I'm going to teach everybody the secret to successful business, but I'm going to circle back to that. But working with employees is one of the hardest things to do. And how many people here are business majors? Right? We're taking business courses. How many people here want to run their own business someday? Right? So let's stop here for a minute. Everybody have a piece of paper? Just jot down for me while I'm talking, if you were to run your business today, what type of business would you run? And then as I'm going through my presentation today, maybe take some notes. Take some notes on how you would brand your business. So, The one employee, where's the deck of cards? Let's keep passing them around. Are they done? Does everybody have one? So the one employee that, thank you, thanks. You know what? You're in the front row, so you get 2 cards. You get 1 card because you were a little late. You get 2 cards, and you get 2 cards. Okay, so cards are good. You'll want to accumulate as many of these as possible. We'll leave it at that. The one employee started to really screw up so that the customers were complaining. And it got to the point where they couldn't have him servicing their customers anymore. You know what happens in a small business is that the owners then have to go back out and do the work again. And it delays the growth of the business. And this is what happened for this business for quite a few years. I worked for them when I was in school. So they were a pest management company. When I got out of school, I didn't want to do pest management, so I got out of the business. At that point, my father had sold off his shares of the business to Richard, who had hired another employee, and the other employee worked with Richard for a few years. So we'll leave that part of the story aside. For myself, I went to Long Island University. I studied communications. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my career. I really wanted to be in law enforcement, but I didn't want to be a cop. I wanted to be an FBI agent. You know? And I used to sit there and I would visualize how cool it would be to be an FBI agent and to do you know, investigations. I thought that that would be a really cool thing to do. So I went through my college years, and I started off as a criminal justice major, and I realized that I didn't want to be in law enforcement, so I didn't know what I wanted to do. I got involved in the communications program, public relations, and I graduated with a Bachelor of Fine Arts in communications. I got out of school, and I still didn't know what I wanted to do. And I waited tables for a few years, and I began to see some of my very good friends get real jobs. They were wearing suits. They were driving company cars. They were moving into their own apartments, and I was waiting tables. And I began to feel really badly about myself, and I began to question whether I was ever going to be successful. You see, when, you know, and she'll be the first one to tell you this, back in school, I wasn't a very good student. I wasn't. She would come home with honors and A's, and I would get C's, and my dad would scream and yell at me. But it wasn't because I was stupid. It was because things just didn't interest me. Give me something that interests me, and you've got my full attention, and I'll be successful at it. Give me your baseball cards and tell me that do you know what baseball cards are? Because do they still have those? Okay. Give me your baseball cards and tell me to organize those for you, and I'll have them in order by team and by player number, and that's what I was good at. I could do something like that. Give me something interesting, and I can absolutely do it. So after a few years of waiting tables and watching some of my friends be successful and really questioning what I'm going to do with my life, I said, you know what? Maybe I should have stuck with the pest control industry. Maybe I could have made something more of it than I did. Maybe I could have taken over my father's business, but he sold it now. But it's what I know. They taught me good. I know a little something about the pest control industry. So I called up Richard, my dad's old partner, and I said, listen, would you have any opportunities for me? And he said, no. He said, I have one employee. Everything's fine. I'm sorry, I don't have anything. So I called up another company, Terminex. Who's heard of Terminex? Right? Terminex is the largest pest control company in the world. I called them up and I said, I'm looking for a job. It was termite season. They were like, come on in. Terminex, by the way, will hire anybody during termite season. That's what they'll do. Doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter, they will hire you. So they hired me as a residential salesperson. I knew nothing about sales. I didn't even know anything about termites because I worked with my father servicing food processing facilities. But I worked there for 3 months. I made some money, and I just said to myself, this is not for me. Sales, not for me. Now it's for me. I love sales more than anything now, but back then it wasn't for me. It was too much work. It was too much work. I didn't like rejection. So I I said to them, you know what? I'm not getting leads that are flowing in for sales opportunities. I think I'm going to leave. And the regional manager said, well, hold on a minute. You came to us with some experience in pest control servicing commercial facilities. I said, yeah, I did. He goes, I'm going to make you our commercial service manager for our Long Island region. I was like, really? He's like, yeah. Wow, great. They gave me a beat-up car, and they gave me $23,000 a year, which I couldn't even live on, by the way. But you know what? I took it. I took it because I needed something. And I began to realize then that I better dig in and get really good at something, or life might even pass me by. I was afraid at that point that I wasn't going to have, you know, a comfortable lifestyle. I would just think that, you know, I knew houses cost, what, $500,000 in Long Island? How was I ever going to buy a house? I make $23,000 a year and can't even pay my bills for $23,000 a year. So I was a commercial service manager, and I hated it at the beginning. My employees were 11 technicians that worked for me. I didn't have any formal management skills. I didn't know how to manage them. I didn't know that much about the business still. And I wound up really running around in circles a lot. I would be out doing service while somebody was on vacation. I'd be doing service for them. A big job that had to be done on a Saturday night that nobody wanted to do, I had to go do it because I was the manager. And I would complain and complain and complain that I felt like I was being taken advantage of, I'm not managing anybody, and this is just not for me. And then my father's partner, Richard, who I would speak to on the phone, said to me, listen, don't ever treat any of those clients as if they're not your client. Because I would complain to him, I don't want to go out on a Saturday night and do this. And he said, you're going to go do it. He had no interest in the business. It was just solid advice. Treat every one of those clients as if they were your own. Treat that business as if it was your own business. And I began to evolve as a person back then and as a manager. And I began to realize that it doesn't matter what we're doing, but we have to do a great job at it no matter what. And that was a lesson from my father also. My father, who was always a laborer his whole life, used to just say, you know what, if you're going to dig a ditch, make sure you dig the very best ditch you can dig and take pride in what you do. So over an 8-month period of being a commercial service manager for Terminex, I was able to garner the respect of the employees, the clients, and slowly I evolved into being a good manager, where I now had people wanting to do things for me. And I became a very successful service manager for Terminex. Within 8 months, I was the top service manager for client retention and productivity for the entire Northeast. This was cool to me, because now I'm a kid, I'm still not making any money, but now I'm seeing statistics come in. Profit and loss statements are being shared with me. I'm being recognized. So let's stop right there. What do people want more than anything in life? Hold on. Wait, what? What's your name?
Michael.
Michael, you get a card. Good job. What do people want more than anything in life?
Recognition.
Absolutely. People want recognition more than anything in life. Don't get into business for money. Money's great. Don't get me wrong. We all need it. But you don't get into business for money. You get into business because you have a passion for something. And when you have employees, you've got to manage those employees, and you've got to recognize them. They're not in it for the money either. They're in it for a purpose. That's just human nature. That's two-legged humans. So I began to give my employees recognition. And I was being recognized. And I began to really enjoy what I was doing. All of a sudden, I had a passion for what I was doing every day. And I was successful. And my clients liked me. And I wanted to do good for them. What a great cyclical relationship that is. So much so that I got recognized by the company. They invited me to participate in what they call the TMT program, Terminex Management Trainee Program. And they made me a branch manager. It was a one-year program where you did every single job in the company. So here I was a service manager, and I had to do residential termite work, residential pest control work. I had to do administrative work. I had to do sales work. I had to do every single job in the company, but I also learned I would go to conferences, and we would spend time with human resource managers, and we would spend time with the staff company entomologist, and I would learn every part of this business. And it was great. When I was done, I've got my first assignment. I was now the branch manager of Long Island Commercial, and I was being paid $32,000 a year. I still couldn't even pay my bills. I still couldn't pay my bills, but I was making $32,000 a year. They gave me a new car. Now I had a new car, and I got to wear a suit to work every day. So even though I didn't have the bank account to back it up, I began to feel as important as some of my friends who had successful careers that they were starting. I worked for Terminix for 2 years as a branch manager on Long Island, and then in the New York metro area. I ran their operations in the New York metro area. 32 employees, a $2 million business. And I was very successful with it. But my heart was always in the technical part of the business, what my father and Richard Camerling taught me. I wanted to be in food processing plants. I wanted to teach people. I love doing training. This is my favorite thing, speaking, by the way. I love doing training. And I wanted to be a technical specialist for Terminix. There was a position called technical specialist. And if you're a technical specialist, you go from branch to branch. You're in charge of the region for all the work that the technicians do, regulatory compliance, training. So I shared with my regional manager during one of my employee appraisals. Everybody know what an employee appraisal is? No? Nobody knows what an employee... I have a card for anybody who knows what an employee appraisal is.
A review of how your employees are doing.
Very good. A review of how your employees are doing. So some companies will do an appraisal twice a year on an employee. Some will do it once a year. And it should always be taken very seriously. The appraisal should be a review of accomplishments and goal setting for the next year. It should be very specific. Should be something that's almost tangible, where you know that that employee will have very specific goals that they can reach, something that's measurable. So during one of my appraisals, I shared with my regional manager, Frank Neller, that I wanted to be a technical specialist. And he said to me, okay, the next time we have an opening in the region, we'll interview you for the position. I said, okay. So I found out that they had an opening up in the Massachusetts area, and I wanted to apply for the position. The next day I found out they hired somebody for that position, and I was very upset because they said they were going to interview me. They didn't interview me. So I called up Frank Neller and I said, you hired somebody as a technical specialist for the Massachusetts region. Why didn't you interview me? And he said, Hank, you're doing such a good job running the New York metro area. Why would you want to be a technical specialist? I go, because that's what I want to do, Frank. And he goes, Hank, we're not taking you out of that branch. And it was like another lesson learned that I would never prescribe to today. We're good? Thanks. So I will never, as a manager, hold an employee back from an opportunity just because they're doing a good job with something. And it's just one of the many lessons that I've learned in running a business. If I recognize a talent in Michael, and Michael wants to do something within the organization, and he's doing a great job where he is now, you still got to give somebody an opportunity, right? Because you want to surround yourself, good managers surround themselves with good people. So what I want to share with everybody is what I think is really the key to running a successful business. Are you ready? Are you ready to learn what the key is to running a successful business? Okay, here we go. Better. Okay, there's 2 circles on the board, if everyone can see well. Okay. This one says what, how, and why. This one says why, how, and what. Now think about something. We're going to use the company. What's the most successful company we all know? Who said it first? Okay, you get a card. Can you pass this card back to that young man? Thank you. What's your name? Thank you. Good job. Apple, the largest company in the world now, the most successful company in the world. Let's think about Apple for a minute and why they're so successful. Are they so successful because they have the smartest employees? You don't think Dell has smart employees? They do. You think Microsoft has smart employees? They do too. In fact, lots of the same employees that work for Apple or work for Microsoft or work for Dell have worked for the different companies. So it's not the employees necessarily, is it? What is it? So, yes. They have a very good product. So you like, what does Apple make? Do they make computers?
Anything technological.
They make computers, right? What else does Apple make? They make phones. They make tablets. Did they make an iPod? Okay, right? What if I told you that Dell makes great MP3 players? Would you buy one? No, right? What if I told you that Dell makes a great telephone? Would you buy one? Yes?
Because they built a brand. Like they have brand recognition and they are selling you. They get modern, sophisticated.
So they have a brand. They've built their brand, right? But it's more than that even. It's the culture. And let's take a look at this. So, most companies work like this. This is how most companies work. What do? We make computers, right? This is how we make them. But they never really answer why we make them, right? Why do you make it? To make money? But in the world of Apple, they've reversed that order. It's why they do what they do. When I learned this, I tried to adapt that for my own business. What makes my company so special? I run a pest control company. I work with lots of food manufacturers. Why would you work with me instead of Terminex? Because we have a passion for what we do. Because we understand your business. Because we live and breathe our business every single day. It's the culture that we've developed in our company. So it's why we do what we do. Once you get that out of the way, it doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter whether you run a pest control business. It doesn't matter whether you have a restaurant or you manufacture a product. You have to determine why you're going to do what you can do, why you do what you do. If there's anything that young entrepreneurs have to think about, it's why you're going to do what you do, not what you do. Does that make sense? So, excuse me. So let's keep that in mind as you begin your careers and start thinking about a business that you want to run and how you would brand it, right? You have to think about what you're passionate about, and then are you going to be able to build that culture throughout your whole organization? So, back to my story. Terminex didn't give me an opportunity to become a technical specialist. So I saw an ad in a trade magazine for a technical director for a company called Viking Pest Control in New Jersey. I applied. I interviewed well. And that's another lesson that I learned a long time ago, is that, and as a manager, you can give me 2 resumes. You can give me a resume of somebody that has an MBA from Yale University, and you can give me a resume of somebody that has a 4-year degree from St. Francis College. And on paper, who would I hire? Right? You think so, right? Not necessarily. Because running a business is about people, right? And you know, my sister is the Associate Dean of Psychology here at St. Francis, but I can run circles around her when it comes to dealing with psychology, because that's what's made me a successful manager for so many years, is you have to work with people. And when you go on an interview, yeah, I want somebody who looks the part. I want somebody who looks me in the eye and shakes my hand. And I want somebody who comes prepared, who asks good questions, who shows an interest, and who I think is going to fit into our culture of why we do what we do. They've got to buy in. They've got to buy in. So, so another lesson learned is successful managers don't just manage the business. It's not about numbers. It's not all about marketing. It's not about sales. It's about working with people. So there's a lot of different things that we do in our organization. One is called interviewing. Not interviewing, but interviewing. So that each of our managers that work for us, they've got to interview their own employees. And I'll ask our managers, I'll ask them different questions. What's your name?
Christine.
Christine. So if Michelle was your manager, I would ask her, I would say, how well do you know Christine?
I know Christine pretty well.
Really? Where does she live?
Edison, New Jersey.
Is she married?
No.
Does she have a boyfriend?
Yes.
Right? Where did she go to school?
Rutgers.
See? But you get the point. She needs to know all about you, because a good manager knows all about their employees. And that's an important lesson learned. It's all about people. People and people management. So, I interviewed with Viking Pest Control. They loved me right away. They loved me because I did a great job interviewing with them. We hit it off. They liked that I had operations experience, and they liked that I was passionate about what I do. And they gave me a chance to be their senior technical director. They even sent me back to school to Rutgers to study entomology. And I took courses at Rutgers entomology at a master's level program in entomology. And from there, my career just started to just grow and grow. I became one of the better respected people in my industry. I was asked to speak at conferences, and I was loving it, and I loved and my passion continued to grow. So Richard Counterling came to me 2 years after working for Viking and said, hey, this guy who's working for me, he's really screwing up, and I think I've had enough of this. Would you want to come to work for me with the agreement that you will take over this business someday? So I said, okay, I'll do it. And I left Viking, and I went back to work with Richard as a technician. So I was, with Viking, a senior technical director. I had 2 managers that worked for me, and I was in charge of quality and regulatory compliance for the entire company, 100 employees, 6-branch operation throughout New Jersey and New York. I gave that up to climb back into a service vehicle and to do service again at the age of 30. And that wasn't easy for me to do, but it was what I was taught to do, which is, you know, see the light at the end of the tunnel and work really hard to get whatever you want in life. And I did. And I went out and I worked hard. And I would show up for work in my uniform. I would service all my clients. I got up at 4 o'clock every morning. I would do work at home for 2 hours. I would do prospecting on the computer, looking for different food processing plants. I'd make phone calls from the car, hands-free, phone calls from the car to try to set up sales appointments. I'd work all day, and I would set up a few sales appointments in the afternoon. I would have a change of clothes in the car, and I would change it, or in the truck. I would change it into the truck. I would go on sales calls, and all of a sudden I began to grow the business. And the business got big enough that we could hire a full-time employee, and it was great. And then we hired a second full-time employee, and it was even better. And all of a sudden, the amount of work that I had to do out in the field was transitioning into being a manager and into doing sales, which is what I wanted to do, and it was great. My father's partner also began to see the light, former partner began to see the light as well, a different light. He began to see a bulb with a flash, a money sign inside of it, because the business was growing. And then I began to realize that, you know what? For every client I add, because we still hadn't structured a buyout, every client that I added, the business was getting bigger, and that I was going to have to buy back from him. I was bringing all this new business, and I was going to have to buy it all back from him, and I didn't know how to do it. You know, so one of the things that I wanted to share with everybody is, you know, I asked everybody to write down a business that you could see yourself running. Not all businesses have to come from scratch. You could actually work for a company and maybe buy in, or buy out a company at the right time, which is something that we're looking to do right now. We're looking at acquisitions as a way to grow our business. And I'm actually in close contact with a perfect person profile-wise. He's got no children. He's in his 60s. He wants to retire. And his business works with the food industry. It's perfect for us. So acquisitions are a great way to grow your business. Everybody knows what an acquisition is, right? Okay, good. So, I started to think, how am I going to buy this business from this guy? And I began to speak to my accountant. My accountant was the guy who hired me at Viking Pest Control, Dan Gordon. And because I left to go on my own, I inspired him to go leave and start his business. And Dan is a CPA, and now he's got a very successful business working with small service companies. But I said, Dan, I don't have any money. How am I buying the business from him? And he said, well, let's structure it so that he holds a note for the business. He'll hold a promissory note. You'll make payments to him, and you'll buy the business from him. And that was fine, but I still needed some cash. So Dan said, don't you have any cash? I said, not really, no. I just got married. I just had a kid. I bought a house, but I didn't have any money saved up. And I didn't want to go to my parents, right?
Right.
Yeah, I didn't want to go to my parents. So I went to the bank, and the bank gave me a $50,000 loan. And when I went to the bank, I had this piece of paper, and I had to say to my wife, you need to sign this too, because you own half the house. How do you think that conversation went? It went like this: I'll sign it, but if you fail, I'm out of here. She didn't really say that, but you know what? She showed some faith in me, and she co-signed that $50,000 loan, and we worked out a deal for me to buy the business for $375,000. And it wasn't an easy buyout, because my dad's old partner, Richard, didn't want to let go. He liked that I was growing the business. He didn't want to let it go. And what wound up happening is that I kind of forced him into selling the business to me, because I said, if you don't sell the business, I'm leaving, and I'm going to start something on my own. So we worked it out. I bought the business from him, and his parting words to me was this: I know what you're going to do. You're going to make some money, and you're going to spend this business into the ground, and it's going to come right back to me. And I've never forgotten those words. And it always stayed with me. But all it did for me is add fuel to the fire, because I was determined. There was just no way I was going to fail at this business. And I would literally get out of bed at 3:30 in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'd work for 2-3 hours at the house, my home office. And I'd go out and I'd service my clients. And I'd get home and I would work another 2-3 hours. And I worked nonstop, relentless. So the Giants, and by the way, I'm embarrassed to say, everybody saw the Super Bowl on Sunday, horrible Super Bowl, right? I'm a Jets fan, so I've never got to see the Jets in the Super Bowl. But the Giants were in the Super Bowl the year I bought the business, which was January 2001. And they were playing the Baltimore Ravens. So if you think that the Broncos lost bad, the Giants lost equally as bad to the Ravens back in 2001. I didn't see the game. It's the only Super Bowl I think I've ever missed since I've been watching football since 1982. So why wasn't I watching the game? Because I was out doing service. We had some business up in Vermont that we used to subcontract out. I got rid of the subcontractor, and I said, you know what, I'll go out and do it myself. So all day on Super Bowl Sunday, I got up at 3:30 in the morning. I didn't get home till 9 o'clock that night. I was out servicing a bunch of little Frito-Lay bins throughout the state of Vermont. At the end of the day, minus my expenses, I made like $350. I didn't care, because I was just so determined that I was not going to fail. I wouldn't spend a dime on anything either. I was the cheapest guy going back then because I had to make this work. You know, and there's a thing with business called accounts receivables, right? That's the money that's owed to you, accounts receivables. And when you transition and you buy a business, where are all those checks going? They're going to the old office, right? Even though you send a little notice to them to send the checks to the new office, it's going to him. And I had to wait for him to forward all the checks to me. Our cash flow was at least 30 to 60 days behind before we started to bring in any money at all. And it was difficult, but we got through it, and we continued to grow the business. And don't forget, I had 2 employees, so I had to pay them no matter what, right? They had to get paid no matter what. We grew the business over the years, and today our pest management company operates in 15 states with 50 employees, and we're a $6 million organization. We are one of the 100 largest pest management companies in the United States, but more importantly than that, we service more food processing facilities than any pest control company in the United States because we found our niche. And I work with some of the largest food processors. I work with PepsiCo and all their brands. I work with Gatorade, I work with Frito-Lay, I work with Quaker. I work with Nestle, which is the largest food manufacturer in the world. We work with Bimbo Bakeries. Anybody hear of Bimbo Bakeries? Anybody know their brands? Well, Entenmann's, Freihofer's, Arnold's, Stroman's, Thomas's English Muffins, Boboli Pizza Bread, Sahara Pita, largest baking company in the world, located in corporate office in Mexico City, 18 different countries. We service 15 major processing plants for them and over 100 of their distribution centers. So we found our niche. We've been very successful working with the food industry. As the food industry itself has evolved, the requirements on them with regulatory and working with major retailers, they've got to do things a little bit differently than they used to. The food processors have to do things differently. So in January 2011, President Obama signed the Food Safety Modernization Act. Think about that, the Food Safety Modernization Act. If you're a congressman, are you signing something called the Food Safety Modernization Act? James? You bet what congressman's not going to sign something called the Food Safety Modernization Act? They all signed it. It was signed into law. It had sweeping reform over the food industry, and all of a sudden the requirements on food manufacturers got even more stringent. They had to all of a sudden have what they call the HACCP program, Hazard Analysis Critical Control Points. It's a whole systemized way of protecting the product flow. The food retailers came crashing down on the food manufacturers. Walmart, Target, Costco, all these big food retailers, and put really tight requirements on the food manufacturers. And all of a sudden they have to go through these special third-party food safety audits. And with all of that and all the pressure on the food industry, along comes, oh, I was going to show you. I have business cards, by the way. Along comes comprehensive food safety. That's our food safety consulting, auditing, and training division. So all of a sudden, we were able to capitalize on the needs of the food industry. You know, and then we can look at it today. Not only do we do that, but we do lots of things for the food industry. Industrial cleaning. We do lots of training. We'll do repairs on overhead doors. There's so many different services that we offer the food industry today that the first phone call they make when they need something is to our office. And that's where we're at. So we've had a very successful business with that regard. So, you know, I just took a few notes that I just wanted to share with everybody as I was preparing for this. And I thought about, you know, what made me really want to go into business? Did it just happen? I shared with everybody that I was afraid at one point in my life because things weren't going so well. But there was a couple of things that just excited me. And one was that when I was in college. So it's just to share a fun story with you. I went to Long Island University, C.W. Post College, Long Island. And I had never been away for spring break before. So spring break was coming around, and I had some friends, new friends in college, and I said, why don't we just get in the car, we'll drive down to Virginia Beach. And one of my friends looks at me and he goes, Virginia Beach, are you crazy? I'm not going to Virginia Beach. He goes, you know what? Why don't we fly to the Bahamas and we'll stay on my father's yacht? And I was like, okay, great, right? Who's your father? My father owns Angelo's in Little Italy on Mulberry Street, which is a New York City landmark now. How did your father come to own Angelo's? My father came over to this country as a busboy, and he worked his way from a busboy to a waiter, to being the chef, to being the manager, to buying out the business, and then he grew it. He had a vision of what the business was going to become. So we flew down to the Bahamas, and we stayed on the yacht. And I've never had an experience like this in my life. You go out in the Bahamas, and you're at a club, and you tell a girl, do you want to come back to my yacht at the end of the night? And there's nothing like it. There's nothing like it. But to stay on that yacht, we get on the yacht, we open the refrigerator. And it's loaded with beer. And I said, your father's the greatest guy I've ever known. This is amazing. But when I saw that, and I looked around at all these yachts, I said, you know what? This motivates me. This motivates me. But I still didn't have a vision of what I wanted to do. Richard Camerling, my father's old partner, who mentored me, he had a phone in his car before people had cell phones. And I was so enamored by that. But so two lessons with this. One is, once you find out what you really want to do, you've got to find yourself a mentor. And by the way, when you run a business and you're successful, something happens at some point. It only happened to me in the last couple of years. But what happened to me is I began to see myself as a mentor to some of the people who work for me. It wasn't like a switch that was turned on that said, oh, by the way, can you mentor me? It happened organically, where I just began to realize how important I was to some of my employees and how I would mentor them day in and day out. Because running a business, you've got to be involved with the psychology of your employees, and you've got to get to know them, and you've got to be a good coach to them. So I would tell everybody in this room the importance of finding a mentor in your life. I've had a couple of great mentors in my life. My father's old partner, Richard Camerling, was a great mentor at one point in my life. I also did the Ironman race. Anybody know what the Ironman race is? What is the Ironman race?
I don't want to say like an obstacle course, but kind of, you know,
It's a triathlon. You have to swim, bike, and run. So you have to swim 2.5 miles, bike 112 miles, and run a marathon. I did it in 2009. It changed my life forever. The training that went into that for 1 full year is something that I still use today to run my business. The discipline that was involved, the regimented schedules that were involved. But what I also did is I solicited the help of a coach. I hired a coach to help me get through it. His name is Don Fink. Today, Don Fink is one of the biggest mentors I've ever had in my life and has taught me so much. So you've really got to get yourself a mentor. And even today, at the age of 45, by the way, I'm younger than her. But at the age of 45, I have a mentor, a couple of mentors today that I still go to with questions when I'm not certain about something, or really just to collaborate, because collaboration has become a huge part of our business. We collaborate over everything. We have a core of managers, and most decisions are made through collaboration. Collaboration is key. So Finding a mentor is huge. You have to keep that in mind. With the businesses, I'm sorry, my voice is just going away. With the businesses that everybody wrote down that you could see yourself running, there's another key thing. Visualize. You've got to see yourself running that business. I'll tell you a little story. When I was doing work with Richard Camerling, and then I bought the business, I was still out doing some work. I worked with a big company called Unilever. Everybody's heard of Unilever? Unilever, Ragu, Lipton, Suave, Country Crock, third largest food manufacturer in the world. And they make other products, cosmetics too. So I used to service one of their warehouses in Crestkill, New Jersey. And I would go into this warehouse and I would do the service. And because what I would do, you know, in pest control, you do an inspection. And I would go into this area in the front of the building. And it was just some offices. And they were empty. And there was some old desks in there. And I would sit down in there and I would write my report. And I would look around this room. And I would say, you know what? Someday I could see myself filling up this office space. And I would look at it and I would say, I could see myself sitting right here in this office and this being my desk and having, you know, a right-hand manager work here. This is when I had 2 employees. And then I could see myself having some administrative staff in here, taking this room, making it into a conference room. But I always had a vision. I had a vision of what I wanted, vision of where I wanted my company to go. Well, when the right time came, I spoke to my client. I said, you know those office spaces that nobody uses? Would you be interested in renting them to me? He goes, Hank, you renovate them, they're yours, $15 a square foot. Everything else around here goes for $26 a square foot. It was done. We made a small investment. We moved in. We worked in there from 2003 to 2011. And then we outgrew the space. We outgrew the space. So just visualize. I think that's a key component, is visualize where you think you can take your business. I've talked about getting to know your employees, right? The people side of running a business. The people side of the business is huge, and I think I've made that point. But you ever think about yourself and think about your personality? And does your personality fit running a business? So one thing that I've learned, and my sister did not teach this to me as a psychologist, is that there are 4 different types of personalities. 4 different types. So one is amiable. One is a driver. One is an expressive. And one is an analytical. 4 different types of personalities. By the way, these 4 different personalities, amiable, somebody who wants to please other people. A driver, just like that, a driver. Somebody who's got blinders on, sees something they want, and goes after it. An expressive, somebody who talks a lot with their arms and is outgoing and touches people and likes to hug people, an expressive person. And an analytical, somebody who loves to just look at numbers and analyze a situation. For those 4 different types of personalities, not one is better than the other. In fact, for all 4 of those different types of personalities, each one of them has been represented by a US president at some point. So one is not better than the other. But did you ever think what type of personality you are? I'll tell you what I am. I'm an amiable guy. I like to see other people be happy. I like to see other people be happy, and I go out of my way. My employees love that because I want them to all be happy. What makes me happy as a business owner? 2 things. One, I like to see my clients be successful, and I like to see my employees be successful. So that makes me happy. I'm an amiable guy. Now with that, what am I not? I'm not a driver, I'm not expressive, and I'm not an analytical guy. But because I know I'm an amiable and I'm not these other three, I know where I need to focus my attention, right? I know I need to focus my attention on being a driver sometimes, on being expressive, and on being an analytical. So I'm up here talking, and I'm very comfortable talking in front of a group. I do it all the time. I wasn't the very first time I spoke because I'm not an expressive guy. But I've learned to become that. I think, and that's an important lesson for each of you. Identify what your personality trait is, and then work on the other areas where you can improve. Because if you can connect on all 4 of these personality traits, you're going to be very successful. And not only that, you've got to identify the personality trait of your employees so that you can help develop them to overcome the areas that don't come so easily to them. Does that make sense? Good. So that's just a little lesson for the psychology lesson of the day. So just another key to success that I'm going to share with you. So there was a study done where Stanford University, and they brought children into a room, and they told the child, I'm going to give to you 1 marshmallow. I'm going to leave you alone in the room for 15 minutes. When I come back, if you don't eat the marshmallow, I'm going to give you 2 marshmallows. If you eat the marshmallow, you don't get a second marshmallow. How many people here think that they can go the 15 minutes without eating the marshmallow? Right? We all do, right? But these children were 4 years old. 4 years old. And what they did is they videotaped the children. So when they left the room, the children would look at the marshmallow. They'd smell it. Some would lick it. They'd poke at it. And 3 out of 4 would eat the marshmallow. They couldn't wait the 15 minutes to get 2 marshmallows. But what you learn from watching the video is that at the age of 4, all of those children knew right from wrong and what they were supposed to do, because none of them ate the marshmallow right away. But then what they did is they watched the kids for the next 15 years of their life, so that they were 19 years old. And the kids who didn't eat the marshmallow, which was 25% of them, because 3 out of 4 ate the marshmallow, 25% of those kids they watched for the next 15 years of their life, every one of them was successful. Every one of them was successful. The other 75% were middle of the road to having trouble in their lives. What's the lesson here? The lesson is, and it's one of the most important lessons, that the delay of self-gratification, leads to success. That's being disciplined. The delay of self-gratification leads to success. It's a good question. It's one of those you shoot first and ask question later questions. I was so anxious at the opportunity to take over this business and to tell everybody that I was part owners of a business that I was going to be taking over, that I joined the business before we had any formal plan to actually have me take it over. So Richard offered me 5% of the business, which was nothing. It was meaningless. 5% of the business to come to work with him, and we'll work out the details later. And I mean, nothing bad to say about Richard other than he just didn't want to get, we never got down to the nitty-gritty of the details of structuring a buyout until I had reached a level where I was done. And I Z'd out. So amiable people, by the way, amiable people avoid confrontation. Amiable people don't like confrontation. We'll avoid it at all costs. We'll avoid it, and we'll avoid it, and we'll avoid it until we Z out. And then when we Z out, we come right back and we're in your face and we're done with it. And that's what happened in this situation. And that's the personality of an amiable. Other questions?
What is your full name?
My full name is Howard Francis Hirsch, and I go by Hank.
And where is your company located?
My company is based in Westwood, New Jersey. That's where our corporate office is. We have a small satellite office in Newark, Delaware, and then several of our employees work remotely from their homes. So we have employees that live and work up in the Boston area, upstate New York, to western upstate New York and central upstate New York. You know, one's out by Utica, the other one's in Albany. Employees that live out in central Pennsylvania, southern Virginia, Maryland, et cetera, so that we are able to cover our service territory. The consultants that work for my other business, CFS, the consulting business, they travel, and our clients pay for our travel wherever we go. One lives in Florida, the other one lives in Atlanta, one of them lives in Delaware. These 3 full-time consultants travel all over the place, and it's written into the agreement that the clients pay for the travel.
Is that all wrapped into the same business?
Well, there's 2 separate businesses. One is the consulting business, and the other one is the service business. RK Environmental Services provides pest control services. Comprehensive Food Safety provides consulting, training, and auditing.
They're 2 separate organizations.
2 separate businesses, but they feed each other opportunities.
So what role do you play in both of them?
I'm the president of both companies. I have a general manager for RK Environmental Services that oversees our operations. I have a managing director for Comprehensive Food Safety that oversees those operations. I have a vice president of business development who works for both companies, and she oversees sales and new business opportunities. And then I have a food safety and quality assurance manager who works for both companies, overseeing quality and establishing programs, et cetera. Question. So when we talked about visualizing, I would sometimes visualize while I was working for Viking. How could I start my own business? And I thought about it because I had a good reputation. I knew the business better than anybody. How can I start my own business? And I used to think, well, you know, I just got married. I could set up shop in my mother-in-law's house as an office. I could buy a truck. I could put an ad in the Yellow Pages, and I could just try to start from scratch, right? Does everybody know what the Yellow Pages are? Yes. Okay. And I could try to start from scratch. I just never got to that point before the opportunity with Richard was presented to me. And then I saw it as a better option. He had already worked with several well-established big food companies. And when I went to work for him, and I worked with him for 2 years before I bought it out, all those clients knew me, and they knew me better than they knew him at that point. So when I bought the business from him, for my clients, it was a seamless transition. Only one of them called me up and said, I understand Richard doesn't own the business anymore. You know, you can't just assume that we're going to work with you. You need to come in and meet with us. And then he said to me, he said, now that you're working with us and Richard's not involved, you need to lower your price. And I said, absolutely not. And I still work with them today. That's 4C Foods in Brooklyn. Everybody knows 4C Foods. Breadcrumbs, iced tea, that sort of thing. Yes, James?
So have you ever read the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People?
I've read it, and I've read it multiple times. It's on my iPad right now. I go back and I read it all the time. And I attended a Dale Carnegie course. And at the end of the course, it was a 3-day course. Each participant had to get up and they had to do a presentation in front of the class. And the winner, God, I didn't bring it with me. They got this little glass statue, and the minute I saw that statue, I said, that's mine.
So what would you say is key to being interpersonal? Like every business, my uncle owns Dunkin' Donuts, and like all throughout Long Island, he says working with people is probably the hardest thing. I always ask him, how do you do it?
You can have a piece of software that you don't ever have to work with people. It would be great, but that's technology. How do you work? First of all, I think that's a great book, and I would endorse it for anybody. How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie is just, I mean, that's an absolute must for any business major. And it goes far beyond just business. I mean, that's your interpersonal relationships with everybody. So your question to me was, how do you work with people? Well, I think that as difficult as it may be, because it doesn't come easy to me, you've got to become an expressive person no matter what. You just have to. So the person that works for me, that is the Director of Food Safety and Quality Assurance. Think of that. Food Safety and Quality Assurance. Which one do you think he is? Amiable, driver, expressive, or analytical? Food Safety and Quality Assurance. He's an analytical. Here, this is Rich Gibson for you when you go to shake his hand. The head goes down. Every time. So, as his coach, I say, Rich, you look him right in the eye. Always look him in the eye. And Rich Gibson now, today, after working for me for 7 years, he could stand up here in front of this room and you wouldn't know that he was an analytical. You would think he was an expressive because he's become that good at working with people. So I think if there's a lesson to be learned from that, it's identifying which personality trait you are and working on those other personality traits. And you've got to be outgoing. I mean, Dale Carnegie says it all, right? Use the other person's name, listen more, talk less, always agree with the person, right? The sweetest word to anybody is their own name. RK Environmental Services is the pest control company. That's the wrong card. Is the pest control company, right? As the food industry began to evolve, food manufacturers were required to go through what we call third-party food safety audits. And with that, there was 5 components to the audit. One of the components was the pest control service. So our clients would call me up and they would say, hey, Hank, we have to go through this audit. Please make sure the pest control program is ready for the audit. So we would make sure the pest control program is ready for the audit, and then we'd come back to them and say, the pest control program is ready for the audit, but what's not ready for the audit is your sanitation program, your maintenance program, your employee practices. They stink. You're going to have trouble on the audit. And then clients would say to us, well, can you help us with that? And I used to say, business opportunity, right? Yeah, we can help you. That was the evolution of our food safety consulting work. As we began to grow that and it became bigger and bigger, we began to see we were running into a conflict of interest. That food companies did not want to hire us to do their food safety consulting and rate our own pest control company because they didn't think that we would be able to ethically do that. So we decided to run them as 2 separate companies, and we don't bring it to a lot of our clients' attention, although they learn at some point, and by then usually there's a lot of trust established, and it hasn't been a problem. It could be, but it hasn't been. That was the motivation of having 2 separate companies. Richard held the note for 7 years. Richard, don't forget, Richard also owned a separate company that did pesticide sales and equipment sales. As part of the buyout agreement, I had to agree to buy my materials from him. So I paid 15% higher for my materials than I would have to buy from a distributor. The note was for 7 years. At the end of 7 years, we satisfied the note and we were done paying him. Profitability-wise, by the time it took us to hit $375,000 in profit, a couple of years by the time we were at that point. All right, who has 3 cards? It's 2 people, 3 people. Nobody has 4. 4. All right, so if you have 1 card, you're probably not going to win. So let's do the best hand. Does anybody have a pair? No? Nobody has a pair?
Yeah.
You have a pair. Then you win. You win. And you get a $15 iTunes gift card.
Thank you.
Right? But I would like the cards back, so you could just maybe pass them towards the middle and I'll collect them. So.